'twas a dark and stormy night, nor'easter rolling in. It's a long 12 hours, the power's out again. I pray for inner strength and that we don't lose no lives. Just another day in the first responders' eyes. Half a cup of coffee's gone, the first run comes in. A car slid off the road, there's a family trapped within. My heart beats like a hammer, I can barely catch my breath. I'm thinking the worst and hoping for the best. Yeah, we ain't superheroes, we're just ordinary people trying to make a difference, and the first on every scene. It's a heavy, heavy burden to carry all this burden when you can't unsee the things you've seen. It keeps going on when those sirens are gone.
Hey, welcome to the award-winning Mad Radio Show with John and Sam. It's all about healing our heroes. And tonight we have some wonderful guests that dedicated their lives to healing heroes. Welcome, Sam. How are you?
Hey, John. Doing great. It has been a busy, busy time. I want to give a huge shout out today to the Garland Independent School District security staff. They had me come out and speak, so I got to talk to them and all of the SROs, and that covers Saxe Police Department, Garland Police Department, as well as Rowlett Police Department. Thank you. A huge, we got to take a pause today and honor them, because as we're going into this 2022-2023 school year, all eyes are on what happened in Uvalde. That's where everybody's mind is going back to. And these guys in GISD, again, Garland Independent School District, they are prepared. And I think there was an understanding, a mutual understanding between agencies that what the frustration and the angst, the stress that Uvalde brought up, nothing like that will occur here, because that's not the way that they train. And I got to hear from the school board president. It was just a really very cool group of dedicated humans who looked after our kiddos, every day when we get them to school, and how refreshing it is to know that not only we here at A Badge of Honor and Mad Radio have their backs, and that's a lot of what we talked about today, what I talked about with them, but that they truly have school safety and security paramount number one. And so thank you, GISD.
You mind if I comment on that?
Say again?
I just want to comment on that.
Yeah.
When you talk about the officers are well trained, and I believe they are, my thing is nobody actually knows how they're going to react when the situation is real. And I can't hold any officer at fault sometimes. The command staff, everything. Yes, Uvalde was a horrible leadership issue.
Decisions. Poor decisions.
Correct. There was a lot of miscommunication. But, I don't ever want to fault any of the officers on their reaction, because nobody knows what their reaction is going to be in a crisis. And when we talk about crises, we look at things, we can be the biggest, baddest bear in the world, right? But you know what? That little beaver comes running up. It may scare the shit out of us and we may run away, So a crisis or an on-site emergency right at that point, we don't know how people are going to react. I've seen the best firefighters, bail out of fires because, in training and in the back rooms, they were all gung ho and a whole bit. But when it came down to that heat, or I've been in shootings where, hey, you know what? We've trained at the range. We know how to fire. But when the bullets are flying at you, or the situation is real life and death, our minds sometimes react differently. And that's why training is so important. Because as you always say,
we practice
train
like
as
we
we
play.
Right? We practice
Yep.
as we play. So training does have a huge, huge part in how you're going to respond. But when you get small communities such as Uvalde, all right, when you have a police department of 8 or 10 officers, training is hard to do on a level where you want to train them every single month or train them bi-weekly in their skill set. New York's got 38,000 officers. They can rotate their officers in and out of training and not miss a beat when it comes to safety of the community. If Uvalde takes their officers off the street, there's nobody to protect them. So training was lacking. The constant training was lacking. So I think that's a perfect, when we talk about crises. When we talk about how someone's going to react in a crisis, I think that's a good segue for you to introduce our guest for tonight.
Yes, absolutely. And I will say that, because this is pertinent to the guests that we have on tonight, is that the more you train, the less likely you are to have that hesitation, to have that second guessing. You know how to respond in a traumatic event in the midst of a crisis, because you've trained it over and over and over again. You've built that muscle memory. I think the public, and certainly, I spoke to one mid-size and 2 relatively small departments for the population size, and there's no hesitation.
Well,
there wouldn't be a hesitation, and I just will say, because it comes with crisis response overall. If you have a plan in place, you train the plan, everybody knows their role.
Wait, no,
it doesn't matter if the shooter is 15 years old or 20 years old, or how many weapons they have, or it's.
No, and I'll tell you, I'm a perfect testament to that.
And those officers that did not respond, and they've been shown the door. What happened in Florida, the chief ousted. Now, how he got picked up at another department, I will not know. But obviously, that city really doesn't care. But there's going to be now less and less tolerance for any department not being prepared to do this, because the knowledge is there, the knowledge base is there, and
right. But
remember,
here's what I just got to say is, when I got into my shooting, right, I trained at the range. We go all the time to the range, right? So I always thought that when I got into a shooting, I would do that whole ghetto stance, pop, 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 over my head, be scared, if someone was shooting at me. I'm figuring, how am I going to react to it? When I got into my shooting, I came up from behind a car in a 2-hand grip, just like they taught me at this, with a 2-hand grip, sight picture, the whole bit. I never even thought the muscle memory would work.
Right.
But back then, and that was back in the 90s, I was able to say, you know what, you're shooting at me. I'm going to get up and I'm going to shoot and kill you. Cops today have so much stuff on their mind. Not only are they afraid to use their firearms, because they're afraid of the repercussions that are going to come. They make the split-second decision in their head. They can't make that split-second decision in their head anymore, because all they see is, if I fire, I'm going to jail. If I fire, I'm losing my house. If I fire, I'm losing my family. If I fire, the narrative and the pressure we have put on our law enforcement officers, a split second, and they're going to get killed. So, but they're thinking in their mind, how is this going to play out on the news? How am I going to be looked at on the news? And you can't tell me not every officer is thinking about that.
On the street, yes. In a
Yeah.
school shooting, oh
Well,
no.
well,
They are not concerned. In fact, they should be concerned because look what we saw.
no, I agree.
We saw a cluster, you know what.
Right.
So I don't think any community, if it's handled correctly and the business is
I'm
taken
agreeing with
care
you.
of,
I'm
yeah,
agreeing with you.
yeah,
But I
it'll
bet you
be
one of those, I
better.
bet you the dollars of donuts, one of those cops are going, well, God forbid I pop in that door and I shoot a kid. And I shoot
Well,
or I
no,
shoot the
you
wrong
train
person.
for that. You train for that. Is there collateral damage?
I
There
know.
could be because each situation is different. But
Correct.
that's why these SROs are assigned to the schools. They do the layout. They do the training. It's a little bit more coordinated than I'll say your average interaction with being on the street for sure.
No, I get you. I get you.
So now making a transition because we are talking about situations of crisis that leave lasting effects. And it's like what happens when the crisis hits home. And I want to bring on our guest. She is amazing, Shahidra Kogil. She is a practitioner and she runs a group called Survivors of Suicide Loss as part of Frontline Crisis Response. Let me bring her on camera. Shahidra, welcome to Mad Radio. Thank you for coming back on.
Hi, Sam. Hi, Sam.
Hey, you've been a guest before, just talking about FCRS, Frontline Crisis Response Solutions. But what you guys are doing specifically with survivors of suicide loss, we go from Mental Health Awareness Month in May. So that's kind of where it's everywhere. Turn on the news, you see commercials on TV, you see, I hate to say Hollywood actors, but you see people of more notoriety bringing crises into the public eye. Then we go into Post-Traumatic Stress Awareness Month, which is June. We talk about suicide amongst first responders. And so there's this buildup. And it's like, wait a second. We're talking about how important mental health is. But unless you've been there, unless you've been in the crises, unless you've dealt with suicide up close and personal, listening to the sound bites, having communities come out in support of, we really don't truly understand, do we?
No, not at all. This is not something that the general public would go searching for unless it is hit home. And I always have told our group attendees that this was a club that they probably never thought that they would be elected to, and nobody ever wanted to join. But it is a community of support in really helping those in the aftermath who have had just a devastating tragedy hit their family, hit their loved ones, and then have no idea how to pick up the pieces following, such a type of tragedy. And it is a unique type of loss, a unique type of grief, and a unique type of trauma. So I'll backtrack and just say I'm glad to be on the show again. I love your energy, Sam and John, your dynamics and how you guys connect. So I'm really looking forward to our talk today.
Let me ask you a question, Shahidra, with suicide and the family members that are left behind, because or the friends, even the friends that are left behind. And I don't know if I'm jumping the gun on this question yet, but the closure aspect. I'm sure you speak to a lot of people who may have received a suicide note, or saw the red flags, or do you see the reaction in the family and friends differently if there is that note, or if there's some sort of closure or a diagnosis? Is there any difference in the crisis response the way they are handling the tragedy?
I would say that there is no way to prepare for this type of loss, whether it is a journey of addiction, a journey of mental health where a person has struggled. I think in the loss survivors I've had an opportunity to work with, it's the worst case scenario that nobody hopes for. But
Right.
it's also not something in the midst of trying to get your loved one the help that you're preparing for. Um, I don't think that there is a difference between receiving a note and not receiving a note. Usually, with those who have had a note, the note again is not very helpful. It doesn't give the answers to the whys. It doesn't give the answers to the questions that run through a loved one's head to subside any guilt, any grief, any intense pain and emotion. Um, I can't say anything other that it's devastating. It's a devastating blow to the layers of people who are impacted, because it's not just that nucleus of family or friends. It impacts the layers of a community and whatever aspects that person may have been involved in during their life.
Is that are you referring to those layers? Is that like the ripple effect that's talked
I
about?
call it the concentric circles, right? So you have
Right.
those who are the closest to that person, who is like a bomb goes off, right? And they're the first to feel the impact of it. Then the news spreads. You have friends, you have the schools if it's a student, you have the workplace, you have, if they're a part of a faith-based community, you have their cultural community, and it goes on and on and on to maybe loved ones who aren't in the state, to people who they may have gone to college with, right? And so you don't really know in the moment how big that explosion is and who is impacted until people begin to speak out. And I think with what is happening in society and recently, really over the last 2 to 3 years, with, I don't know if you're paying attention to the news, stars who have taken their lives. It's almost as if the public figure is a personal friend, because people who have had this experience, it's like it can cycle them back through the grief process because they know what that family is getting ready to go through.
Now, when you say cycle them back through the grief process, we talk about post-traumatic stress, and you can be in a place and smell a smell, hear a sound, and it brings you back to that traumatic event for you that you went through. When people suffer suicide, it sounds like you're talking about, like, there's this community grief, and that it does the same thing. It will bring, if I'm understanding correctly, it will bring them back into their grief that they went through. Do I have that correct? Is it like
Yeah, it
post-traumatic
can.
stress?
So I think you're bringing up a really important distinction, right? And so the grief process and the trauma process are linked together, but they're two different processes. And so
Right.
when we talk about how it impacts the layers of a community, grief is sneaky. It is a natural process that we all go through when loss happens. You don't get to choose how long you stay in the grief process. And unfortunately, this is a very unique type of grief that involves oftentimes a violent way. Suicide is a violent, personal type of loss, because it's self-inflicted. And so there are traumatic aspects to it. So a person could be in the grief process, but also be experiencing post-traumatic stress symptoms.
And would that be, I want to paint a picture for people that have never had this touch their lives. It is traumatic when we lose somebody to suicide. Are the trauma that you're talking about, is it just that layered trauma, or are we talking about like the people that may have found their loved one or
It's
what the
both.
scene may look is both? Okay.
Yeah, it's both. And so I would say for those who unfortunately are the ones that find their loved one or who are there for when it is actually occurring, um, there are certain stressors that happen in that moment that a person can't unsee, they can't erase that from their memory. For those who were not on scene or who show up in the aftermath, they don't see, what has transpired, but they see everything that's around it. So the ambulance that shows up, they see, they get the phone call, they get the knock on the door from the police officer. And so it's almost as if the brain begins to create the scene of what it is, even though they've never seen it. And so it can be a secondary trauma in a sense, but it's what they're imagining, may have happened during that time. And that's the part that gets stuck. When you have a person that takes their own life, in that moment, their life gets almost narrowed down to that moment. And it's hard for their loved ones, their friends to see the life that they lived before because of how things ended. It doesn't mean that it stays that way, but when you first find out about a suicide loss, that's usually where a person gets stuck.
Now, when we talk about the levels of emotion and the grief process, a lot of people, and I've spoke to some people that have self blame. They'll blame themselves for not recognizing the signs, for not intervening, and they hold that as an extra weight on themselves, going, I should have said something, I should have done something, I could have saved him. Do we get a lot of survivor guilt out of suicide?
Oh, of course. Of course. I want to backtrack a little bit before I answer that question, because Sam said she wanted, to paint a picture of what it's like for somebody to go through this type of loss. And it kind of segues into your question, John.
Okay.
One of the tools we use to kind of explain it in a psychoeducation way to, new loss survivors is that when you experience this type of tragedy, it's kind of like going down a waterfall backwards in your canoe, right? You don't necessarily see the waterfall coming, but when you go down, it is a shocking, overwhelming, intensified experience that you are helpless and powerless to stop. At the bottom of that waterfall is kind of the overflow of the waves and just being overcome with all of the emotions that are hitting at once. And so that may be the guilt, it may be fear, it may be anxiety, it may be shock. It may be all of the what if questions that are just kind of rolling through your mind of what happened and, how did this happen? Is this real? This isn't happening. This is a dream. And so it really uproots a person's life. It uproots really their way of being, who they are. And it's in talking with survivors of suicide loss, it changes them. And it almost shifts how they see purpose and what things are meaningful in life. And so when we talk about, the aftermath and really trying to answer the difficult questions about self-blame, inevitably, those are the things that come up. And one of the phases I think that is unique to suicide loss when it comes to grief and trauma is this investigative phase where people will go back through phone messages, emails, voicemails, text messages, social media posts, and just try to dissect, look at pictures, just try to dissect, what did I miss? Why didn't I answer that phone call? Why didn't, they ask for help sooner? I had no idea that this was happening. And so it becomes a shift in focus of what did I miss and I didn't do enough. And I think at the core, whether this was a loved one that got that person all of the therapy that they needed, all of the medication, drove across the country or the world to get them the support that they needed, and this was the outcome, it becomes one of those senses and feelings of I didn't do enough, even if they did everything in their power.
Yeah, that makes sense because I had a officer friend who took his life, and you know I was you look when you say investigate, it really rang a little true because it was like I looked at all the pictures of us together and as a group, and I'm like, well, in this picture and when you say dissecting, well, in this picture he was a little standoffish. He wasn't smiling in that picture. He looked depressed in that picture, and then you start really overthinking it, and you're like, wow, he's back in every picture. He's a little bit, and then you start really like you said, dissecting it. It's you're beating yourself up pretty
Yeah.
much.
How do you, though, if it's almost a natural thing that we do after losing somebody to suicide, that dissection, how do you change that for somebody and say to stop, so they stop beating themselves up?
Yeah.
I have a feeling I just asked a very complicated question.
I would say it's one of the most challenging aspects of the recovery process for a loved one to work through. I also think that for going through the different stages of grief, we teach that this is a process you don't want to get stuck in. The trauma process is also nothing you want to get stuck in. And so you have to allow yourself that space to go through the phases, and then go through them again, and then again, and then again. The first 2 years are probably the hardest for lost survivors because it's the first when their loved one isn't there. So hitting any type of anniversaries, birthdays, any days of significance can really cause that person to go back into a grief cycle. We call them waves, right? So when the waves are big waves and they hit, it knocks you down. And you're all sandy, your face is all in the mud, and it's like, man, I've got to pick myself up today. But when the waves are bearable, maybe they're just knee high, ankle high, you can continue to walk through it. And I think with the grief process, it's recognizing that some days there will be big waves. As you go through it, the waves, maybe they lessen, they dampen a bit. But knowing what to do when the big waves hit is really what the support system and the support group is really focused on, helping people understand. You can get through it, even if it's one breath at a time, one day at a time, one step at a time. But
Well,
it's easier
isn't
to
that
go
kind of
through
what life is
with
about, right?
support.
Right.
Yeah.
But as
So
a
I want,
counselor, I
go
would say
ahead,
as a
John.
counselor, um, it's a hard dynamic because everybody grieves differently. The stages of grief hit us. We could be our first stage could be just overwhelming emotion, crying, sadness, or it could be anger, or it could be resentment. I mean, so whatever it is, as a counselor, how do you? I mean, you it's not routine. You have to. It's an individual's basis. So I commend you on being able to shuffle through all these emotions and be able to treat somebody effectively, when
Mhm.
everything is so different.
Well, what are the phases? Let's talk about that to build the understanding. What
Okay.
are the phases that you just mentioned, Shahidra, in the grief?
I think the first phase is shock. And I think one of the hardest things about going through a suicide loss is that the impact is so great. So I'll give you an example. If it is a mom who's lost a child, and again, like I mentioned, that bomb goes off. It's like everything is muffled and dampened. And so going through, I hate to say it like this, the business of death and getting to the closure and having the frame of reference and the sound mind to plan a funeral when it was unexpected, to tell loved ones, all of that can be done when a person is still in shock. Sometimes it's other family members that pick up, the reins to help. Many times it's the loved ones who are trying to do all of this in the midst of trying to process what has happened to their life, the grief and the trauma experiences. And so the shock can last for an extended period of time.
Wow.
And many times I've heard people explain it like after that loss, the world goes back to normal, but the person who's been impacted is still kind of moving in slow motion. Like you're seeing everything around you go at full capacity and fast speed, but that focus is still on what just happened to my life.
Right.
And so I think it's really important to recognize that initial shock is not something that is a quickly worn off. So I would say that's unique to suicide and any type of violent loss. Oftentimes with suicide, because there is still stigma, even though we are in a season where mental health is trending and suicide prevention is talked about and PSAs are everywhere. When people hear that there has been a suicide loss, it's important to recognize that the experiences for how they're supported may be very different, in that those who they thought would be there to stand with them, to walk with them through the season, they back way off because they don't know what to say, or they say the wrong things, or they feel like suicide is contagious. If I'm too close, then maybe it'll hit my kid or my household. So we got to stay away from them. And so friendships are lost, family dynamics change, and that becomes very isolating, for lost survivors who were trying to find their way through the darkness. I think one of the other areas, we talked about the investigative phase. I think that happens very early on, where there is this searching, like, what did I miss? And that can happen. Every stage that I'm talking about, the person doesn't get to choose what phase they're in. So they can cycle through at different times. So they may go through anger, they may go through depression, they may go through anxiety, they may go through denial, they may go through the investigative phase, and then hit a holiday or a special anniversary or special date and cycle back through those phases because of the triggers.
You brought up a good point, and me and Sam usually touch on this in our workshops, on how to approach somebody and how to speak to somebody after a death. Or, we always say when we look at a first responder, we'll turn around and say, how are you doing? And they're usually saying, I'm doing fine, or I'm okay, right? We don't know the follow-up questions. When we know that something's seriously wrong, we don't know how to follow up. We take okay and fine as an end-all statement, but we know deep down that that's not true. So as a friend or a family member of a suicide loved one, how are you doing? We don't know the follow-ups. We don't know what to say. And that's what could make people shy away and lose friendships, because on one hand, if I lost someone to suicide, I would want my friends and family there. And then I'd be like, well, screw you. You're not supporting me. You're not there for me. Why did you walk away? And on their end, it's like, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to approach. I don't want to say the wrong things. So I could see how that could divide people so quickly. So are we missing that conversation? How do we teach people that conversation? Or is there a way to teach somebody that conversation?
Right. Again, this is usually something that happens suddenly, to where people are not trained, nor are they seeking out training to talk to their loved ones about how to go through a suicide and how they can be supportive. And I think it's different than just normal grief, in that some of the catchphrases that people say may hit differently with someone who has lost a loved one to suicide.
Right.
And so an example of that could be like a religious statement, like, well, God needed another angel. Or, just asking how a person, how they took their own life, right? And wanting details that could be, very inappropriate to ask, as a person who's standing as a support. So I do think that we are missing a part of the conversation. I think that a part of being able to know what to do at the very forefront is knowing that just being there is support. You don't have to know what to say.
But some
Um,
people, I mean, you know what? I'm with you 100%. Where you could just put your hand on their shoulder or their knee and go, "I'm here," and just listen, right? But human nature inside us. Well, how are you dealing with this? How we wanna speak up, and it's a time for us to shut up and not speak up and just be there. But humans, we all wanna we're trying to heal, we're trying to fix, and that's not the time to be the fixer or the healer.
Well, I think, yeah. We have a listener, Bill, who is making some great comments, and just to what you said, John. He said perhaps the best that someone can do for suicide loss is to be there and be silent. And I love these words, a ministry of presence, if you will. And it's not so important that what is said, but rather showing them that you're there and you support them while they travel through the process. That can be most comforting.
I'll
Bill,
let you. I'll,
that's
I'll let
huge.
you know, Bill. I know Bill, and he's a survivor himself. So Bill, if you're listening, are we saying anything as a survivor, being a survivor yourself? Are we saying anything out of line? Are we touching on the right subjects? Give us a comment. Let us know what, as a survivor yourself, what are some of the words that people you would have wanted to hear, or I don't know. I see. I'm already at a loss for words because you don't know what to say. So
Well, I think, John, and what you and Shahidra hit on is everybody's different.
yeah,
While I mean the initial impact, Shahidra, please correct me if I'm wrong. When you're in that shock, okay, and kind of put yourself in this situation where you're at home, you're in that shock stage, and the last thing you want is your neighbors and across the street and everybody knocking on your door, okay? And then kind of look at it a different way, where if you had somebody like Bill saying, a ministry, a presence, being silent, you now have somebody to stand right next to you to support you, so that when everybody's coming over because shock, they're there. Hey, he or she is not ready to see you. Thank you for coming by. Or everybody knows each other. Oh my God, thank you for coming. Come on in. We're surrounding you, so and so, whomever it is, with love, but we're doing it at front in a quiet manner. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that there are different ways to show up for people. And so I say that because
Bill says we're covering it well. Thank you, Bill.
Good. Yeah, I think what people tend to do is give the token, hey, if you need anything, call
Oh,
me.
yeah.
And in that time of shock, in the beginning,
You're not going to
they
know.
may not know what they need.
Right.
They may not be eating. They may not be sleeping. They may not be doing well with their bottom line. And so you saying, hey, call me if you need anything is an extra weight on them, or on their brain to try to.
because now they feel obligated.
Right. And so showing up and being there may be taking on different initiatives. So if this person is in the house, they're grieving, maybe you set up an opportunity for them to get their grass mowed, or you start a meal train, or you reach out, every couple weeks, you send a card, let them know that they're on your heart. One of our survivors of suicide talks about how she had a friend knit a blanket for a new granddaughter that was born, and her son who passed by suicide, in his favorite color, to just show support and to give that sense of presence because he wasn't here. And so she found a way to acknowledge the loss, but also to celebrate the birth. Right. And so I think that there are very creative ways that you can show up, and that there really is no wrong way to let a person know that you care about them, that you're thinking about them, and that you're there. And it's okay for the loss survivor to ask for some time.
Right.
That's
a good point. That's a good
to
point.
say, I see it, I hear you, I got the card. And I'll follow up with you when I can, and for that space to be respected. So.
Speaking of space, I want to get into the nuts and bolts of your program, because you provide a very unique space for survivors of suicide loss to come together to support each other. What exactly, to talk about their grief process and where they are? What exactly does it look like? Because are you the moderator, or do they kind of moderate with other staff? How does that work?
Yeah, so great question. So I'm going to go back just a little bit. We launched our Survivors of Suicide Loss groups in 2016. It was actually one of our first initiatives for Frontline Crisis Response Solutions. And ultimately, it was meant to offer a space in the North Texas region. I think we were the furthest group north in the Dallas Metroplex that was offering a Survivors of Suicide Loss group at the time. At the time, we met monthly, and it was in person, and we really had an open group. And so at any point in time, we could have different people who maybe had a recent loss, or who had maybe been 10 years outside of their journey, who found the group and just needed to come in and process, where they were on their grief journey or their trauma journey. Recently, obviously with the pandemic hitting in 2019, 2020, coming into the new year, all the way through, I guess, present, we had to adapt our groups to go virtual. And so for the last couple of years, we've met online to continue to offer support. With the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, they list a number of groups that happen, in every state and across, the world, really internationally, for any suicide loss survivor to get support via group support. I think it also lists providers who are specifically trained to offer care for suicide-based grief and loss. So we recently adapted how we functioned and offered this group to really two formats. The first format is just peer support and offering 1-hour groups that are on Zoom. They are open to anyone in the nation. And so we're not just limited to Texas anymore. Being online gives us an opportunity to have a greater reach. And so we are actually going to be starting that 4-week cycle of groups, or 4 sessions. We'll do 2 this month and 2 in September, to really just offer resources and information, and really a perspective from a peer supporter's journey for what those loss survivors may be in for. Our groups now are geared for new loss survivors. So over the time that we've been running the groups, we found that the support and the education and the information as early in the process is very helpful in starting them on their journey with, intervention and knowing what to expect from the process, with the whole focus of not wanting people to get stuck in the grief cycle. And so those groups will be happening. We've got a group starting this Friday, I believe, August 5th. And it'll be from 6 to 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. 2 hours prior will be Pacific time, so 4 to 5, and then Eastern time will be 7 to 8. I think I got that right. My brain is working.
I'm always messed
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
Yeah.
that as well.
I usually can only do 2, so you just did 3. That's awesome.
Yeah.
2 time
I figured
zones,
it out.
but
So
yes,
August
and I put the website
yes.
on the screen right now, because you're going to go to this website. If suicide has touched your life, you definitely want to take part in this. You deserve to give yourself this gift and allow others to pour into you so you can heal together. Frontline Crisis Response Solutions.com, and click on our services, and then there's a drop down, and you can find the program.
It should be frontlinecrisisresponse.com.
Oh,
So
okay.
Frontline.
I will. Let me correct that.
You know,
I'm going right now.
When we talked about conversation, and this when Sam says this is a good group for survivors of suicide to join in, because one thing that I'm thinking that people will say, like a family member will try to say, like, if you lose a child, right? If a mom or a father loses their child to suicide, right? And then you have a friend or a neighbor who lost their son or daughter to a car accident or to a medical issue. Losing a child in any way is horrible, but they may come up and say, well, I know how you feel. I lost my son, but you never want to put yourself. That's why this group is so important, because everybody is standing and feeling the same grief. It's not, well, I know how you feel. We know in that group that everybody's feeling that way, because everybody's shared that same type of loss.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. You're definitely in a space where people get it. And there's nothing that you could express that someone in the room would not understand. And so things that they may not be able to share with loved ones, or things that they might not be able to express to a coworker, they hold on to the opportunity to be able to express their truth in the space that we offer. I do want to share one more group that we offer really quick. And I think this is kind of the game changer for our organization. And so we've started to offer what I call a hybrid group that speaks to not only the grief recovery process, but also the trauma recovery process. And so it's a 10-week session, a 10-session cycle group, to where we meet weekly, again, for new loss survivors who are at least 2 years or less outside of their loss. And it really is focused on helping the loved one understand the trauma experience, but also how to understand the grief process. So we spend 5 weeks on grief recovery, and then the last 5 weeks, we really focus on trauma recovery. 3 of the last sessions, we actually do EMDR group format to help those kind of really get their nervous system in alignment and really work towards getting back to regulation and adapting.
Well, we
For
could
those
do a
who don't know
whole.
what EMDR is, can you just really explain? You touched on EMDR. There's some people out there that may be known in the first responder world and veteran world, but a lot of the civilian world doesn't know what EMDR is. Can you just explain that?
Real quick. Yeah.
Real quick. So eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy is one of the oldest modalities, about 30 plus years old. And it's really used to help people recover after, any type of adverse life experience, but it's meant to help process memories and experiences, help them reprocess in a healthy way so that they're not stuck and able to move forward and function.
Thank you.
It is, first of all, very hard to spell. Even though I've been through EMDR myself, I got it right. I didn't get any spell check errors coming up. Woohoo! But EMDR, I'm so happy that you do this, because it is so critical. So folks, if you have suffered a new loss, a new suicide loss, please visit frontlinecrisisresponse.com and get yourself enrolled in the two programs, whichever one they want. I put both of them with a little explanation in the comment stream. It is well worth it because grief and trauma and loss affects everybody differently. But no matter what that looks like, we deserve to have the support. And Shahidra, you and your staff do an amazing job. You're an amazing partner in this. You also do treat first responders. First responders are not, that if suicide loss affects the workplace, they're friends, right? So we gotta, everybody, just because you wear a badge, doesn't mean you're immune from going through the grief and loss process. So please, get over there. And the next group will start on September 25th. Okay, so there's plenty of time. Next group will start on September 25th. The group's going to meet on Sundays from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Central. Again, that's 10 session cycles throughout the year, February, May, July, September, October, December. And that group that is for anybody who is journeying through the traumatic experience of losing a loved one suddenly to suicide. It addresses different aspects of trauma recovery, as well as the grief journey. That's why it's 10 weeks, super important. Incorporated in that, peer support, psychoeducation, mindfulness, and interactive strategies like EMDR that we just spoke about. And the Frontline Crisis Response Solutions, unique recovery and support groups. You will be meeting on Zoom. So it's national in scope. And because you can bring in that level, it's kind of like yay and you have this angst at the same time, because there's a lot of people that are suffering from losing somebody to from losing somebody to suicide. So, but the fact that you have this dynamic large family, to not be alone is really
100%
is really key. So I sounded really intelligent right there, and I just want to let everybody know Shahidra typed it all up for me, and I'm reading it off.
I got to say, I was very impressed. I was very impressed. You didn't screw up one word.
I know I am giving credit where credit is due, because I could not talk about psychoeducation and all of the innovative and interactive strategies like Shahidra can. So folks, again, frontlinecrisisresponse.com. Go there, get yourself signed up if suicide is something that has touched you or a family member. Shahidra, as always, thank you so much for this amazing information.
Yes. Thank you for having us. Yeah,
you bet. And I hope that you guys are flooded with people that really want to heal. Yeah. And thank you, Bill. Bill says, good job, guys.
Yes,
we appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, for
appreciate your comments and your feedback. It means a lot.
So we will be in touch. Thank you so much, Shahidra.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Continue to do great work.
Thank you.
Take care. You too.
So, wow. I'm just going to leave. I'm going to leave that up just as we talk, because it is something that's been needed for a while. They're really targeting it, hitting it well. And I just, it's the deserving aspect for the loss that I want people to just be like, you deserve it. Don't try and tough this out on your own. So go over there and check them out. Hey, we have got a ton of stuff going on, John. The 22nd of every month, suicide is on everybody's mind. Locally here in Rockwall, we have Walk the Bridge, and it's hashtag Walk the Bridge, walkthebridge.org. Go there, find out how you can join the mission and show others that they're not alone in their journey, because you're not alone in yours. That's the 22nd of every month here in Rockwall, as well as the 7th Street Bridge. John leads that one in Fort Worth. We
And
had
now,
amazing turnouts.
let me just jump on that. Now coming to Chicago, we'll
Wow.
start be doing it in Chicago. We just got word today that is now going to be starting in Billings, Montana, Alabama, Florida, and England, and Belgium, and possibly Italy. So it's growing. It's growing across the nation.
Okay, well, we will put all those up on the website so people can check it out and know where to go on the 22nd of every month. There's the website right there on the screen for everybody. We have got some incredible things coming up the remainder of the year with a badgeofhonor.com. In fact, we will be launching a brand new podcast through the OBBN network called A Badge of Honor Podcast. Okay. Look for the changes. We're still Mad Radio. Our next show is the 17th of this month. But after that, in September, the first show in September, we will be a Badge of Honor podcast. You can find out more at badgeofhonor.com. And hey, if you're a first responder listening or a family member of a first responder, jump over to the website and check out what we do. We have 8-hour workshops. We come to the departments or we meet in neutral locations, and we are traveling across Texas doing these workshops. We will be at Garland PD. I like to say our home, because those guys gets it, and those guys get it. I think I just did a New York thing.
Use guys.
Use guys gets it. We will be there in November. But before that, we'll be at the International Association of Chiefs of Police Conference in October, right here in Dallas. And then after that, we're going to be going out to Lufkin, or going down to Lufkin. And for the Deep East Texas Council of Governments is graciously sponsoring us there to bring in all of their law enforcement in the region. We've got DPS joining us with those workshops as well. So post-traumatic stress, suicide awareness, we're out in the open. We got to keep talking about it. We can't keep shoving it under the rug. You've got amazing groups like Shahidras that keeps growing. You've got us. You've got other groups out there. It takes a huge team to make sure that our first responders, our loved ones, our family members, everybody is covered under this umbrella of suicide loss, because it is exactly what Shahidra says. You like a pebble with the waves. The bomb goes off and it affects everybody. And gosh, John, I think I covered everything.
I think you did.
I tried to write down. So, again, don't be strangers. Check out the website. John, take us home.
Sam, I think you said it best. Once again, it does touch everybody, but you got to remember, you are never, ever alone. You are not alone. Do not ever feel that you're alone. Reach out, speak to somebody, call us, call a Badge of Honor, hit us up on our website. There's resources out there. As bad as you feel, we could help you through it. Because we've both been there. So,
absolutely. So until the 17th, everybody, God bless you all. Take care. Be safe out there.
Sam, good night.
Good night.